Gabriel sighed, reclined in his chair and banged his fist against his head. It was hardly the worst result in the world, but it fell far short of what he had hoped. Accommodation, food, and transport were all things he and Nish could afford, but the bloody suits were out of reach. They would have to save up for at least 7 more years before they could afford them, and that was with the previous 3 years of saving up. He sighed once more, stood up and prepared himself to deliver the bad news. Placing the chair neatly underneath his desk, Gabriel stood in his study. Lining the walls were bookshelves and numerous photographs, and on the south-facing wall was a large reinforced window to the outside world. Hanging from a rack was an airtight suit composed of solid and lightweight materials designed to form an impenetrable barrier between the wearer and the outside world. The suit was covered in bits of fabric and patterns to bring it to life and make it appealing to look at. Gabriel began the process of donning it, something that took about 2 to 3 minutes, with an additional 2 minutes of checks to make sure all the seals were functioning correctly. A vitally important process, where he was going simply his presence could kill people and, in the most extreme cases, ruin worlds. Once he was satisfied, he picked up his PDA, a multi-purpose computer that functioned as a phone, wallet, key, camera, and 1,000 other necessities, pocketed it while also collecting his physical set of house keys. It was also a good idea to have a physical backup. Gabriel shut down his computer, left his study and walked down the halls to a giant airlock at the bottom. The doors were high-grade stainless steel, half a meter thick, and looked rather imposing, or rather they had been when they had first been installed. Now they were just a part of the scenery. Keying in the passcode and running a retinal scan, the door opened, and Gabriel stepped inside. The doors closed automatically, and he sat down on a chair and waited patiently for the decontamination process to finish. While he waited, he wondered how he would explain this to Nish. She did so want to travel to Earth, see the world that had raised him, and experience its cultures. Gabriel did not expect hysterics. Nish was an emotionally healthy woman, and could handle a lot of bullshit. But it was never enjoyable to be the bearer of bad news to someone you loved. Pissed, on the other hand, now she might just well start buzzing the news. The decontamination finished, and Gabriel left the airlock and found himself in what seemed to be an utterly different building. It was far more vertical, with high walls and holes in the ceiling, yet it made perfect sense for a species that could fly. Gabriel clambered up a ladder explicitly fitted for him, and he was now in the living room. A sizable wooden rack, called a cobine, was positioned in the middle of the room, with a sofa in front, both facing a television. Resting on the cobine and watching the news was his wife, Nish. She was tall, almost 2 meters, with a thin skeletal body, clothed in a loose-fitting but smart dress. Formal attire, the kind of thing a business person or teacher would wear, which made sense because Nish was a university lecturer. On her back were 2 large scaled wings, like a butterfly. They were beautiful, with 2 eye spots on them and intricate patterns running throughout. Nish held onto the cobine with 6 limbs, 2 legs and 4 arms, one of them being mechanical. That was Gabriel's fault. He had crushed it, though in his defense, he had not intended to fall off the cliff. Gabriel stood underneath his wife. She was so focused on the news that she did not notice him. He climbed up the cobine until he was at her height, and Nish finally realized what was going on as she felt the frame vibrate. "Good morning," Nish said in Ketrok, the local dialect, her wings fluttering slightly. Nish's face was smooth, almost featureless apart from compound eyes the size of Gabriel's fist. The only other distinguishing characteristic was the 2 feathery antennae on her head that twitched and danced at the sight of him. Gabriel pressed his helmet to Nish's face, and they both made a kissing noise, the compromised sign of affection they used. Nish's lips could not pulse, and Gabriel lacked antennae. She was almost entirely white, except for some dark patterning around her eyes. A few of them looked like teardrops. "What's the news?" Gabriel said, resting his head on the highest rung. Ketrok was not a language any human could naturally speak or hear. It involved many fast, high-pitched clicks, whistles, and trills that the human larynx was not capable of making. Even the late, great Michael Winslow would be flummoxed by it. Gabriel had needed some extreme genetic modification to even get to the level he had now, and his Ketrok was still flawed, which meant Gabriel spoke with a Chewfander equivalent of a lisp. Turns out the junior chancellor of Metagord was embezzling. She's resigned and is probably going to prison, Nish explained as they both watched a feel-good piece about a disabled boy who had gone paragliding off the highest cliff face on Yersu. Think there'll be an election soon. That's the third scandal in as many months, Gabriel offered. Nish let out a high-pitched whistle, which was a Chufanda version of a scoff, and replied, I hope so, but these kiters are dug in worse than the Emmas. They'll cling on to their cushy job for as long as they can. Why? They'll just use their connections to get some cushy business gig. They'll be unemployed for all of 15 minutes, Gabriel retorted, drumming his fingers against the wood. Ain't that the truth? Nish replied with a trill. Gabriel turned back to the television, and after a few seconds, Nish said, The news isn't good. I take it. Gabriel frowned and asked, How did you know I got a response? We used our joint email account, you nutraptor, Nish replied with another whistle. I just can't read English, so how's it going? Same as last time. We're going to need to do some penny pinching if we ever want to go to Earth, Gabriel explained with a grumble. Nish put an arm around Gabriel's shoulder and pulled him in close. It isn't the end of the world. We can wait. You haven't failed, Nish explained. Gabriel had a habit of being unreasonably harsh on himself. He had made significant improvement in the time she had known him, but there was always a chance of him regressing. We'll manage it one day, Nish added, giving him an extra hard squeeze. Gabriel sighed. He knew there was truth to Nish's words, but he still felt bad. He glanced at the clock and stated, I'd better get going. I'm gonna be late for work as it is. Garage doors. We share a bank account, Gabriel pointed out. Precisely, Nish said, and on she drove. Next chapter. Want me to drive you? Nish asked as she followed Gabriel down. Nah, you do that, and you'll be milling around your office for an hour for the lectures to begin, Gabriel replied as he stretched. If I don't, I'll just be milling around here. At least at the university, I can get some work done, Nish countered. Gabriel tried his best to scratch the side of his face through his suit and said, Fine, you've convinced me. You should probably start charging me for this. Why? We share a bank account, Nish replied, flicking her antennae. Nish was unusual in that she drove. Personal transport had become a rarity in the modern world. Robust public transport had taken over most people's traveling needs. It was more efficient and cost far less for everyone. Gabriel himself had been unable to drive until coming to Yersu. He had only learned so that he could collect his wife when she and her friends went out drinking, and they were too rowdy to take the bus. Not that Nish did it often, but it was convenient. Owning a car required a lot of payments, primarily in taxes and licensing fees. If anyone did own a vehicle, it was either a bicycle or because it was vital for work. For her part, Nish loved cars and always had since she was a little girl. Loved driving them, loved looking after them, loved modifying them, loved racing them. She had earned herself quite a reputation on the amateur racing circuit and had won strong-armed Gabriel into taking part in an endurance race alongside 6 of her racing buddies. They hadn't won, but they had come in the top 10, and considering Gabriel had only been driving for barely over a year at that point and had 0 racing experience, he felt they had done rather well. They were scheduled to do it again next year, and Nish had already booked out the track so they could practice. With hindsight, they probably should have done that the last time. They walked into the garage, where 4 cars were arranged, 2 in front, 2 in the back. The one on the right was a compact car, cost-effective, reliable, and when it did break, it was easy to repair. The front left car was a large luxury model. Nish had bought it with the money she had been paid as compensation from the Minidrag government after the whole enclosure incident. Comfortable, stylish, and definitely made for showing off. The back left car was a racing vehicle they had used in the race. It had not been moved from its spot for some time, though it was due for a tune-up and still had some wear from the race. A bright 86 was painted on the bonnet. The final vehicle was a large 4-wheel drive truck designed for heavy off-roading. Ever since Gabriel had some into Nish life, she had gotten a bit of a taste for roughing it, and every once in a while they would drive out into the scrub forest and live off the land for a day. They would have liked to stay longer, but using a restroom was tricky enough for Gabriel in the city. The wilderness, they were just asking for contamination, and the whole area might very well be carpet-bombed or sterilized with radiation just to kill any microbes that might escape. Fanda had a much weaker immune system than humans, and a bacteria that lived harmlessly on human skin and did nothing even if it managed to get inside the body had the potential to be a horrendous plague for thousands of species. It was why Gabriel had to live in a specially made section of his house. It was why he needed his suit. His mere presence had the potential to ruin countless lives. "Come on," Nish said, pushing him gently, and they both got into the sensible small car. "You're not going to spoil me with a hyena." Gabriel asked jokingly. "I'll drive it if you cough up the fuel money," Nish replied, starting the engine and opening the garage doors. "We share a bank account," Gabriel pointed out. "Precisely," Nish said, and on she drove.